One of the things I get asked about quite a lot is cutting wood, how to cut it straight, what to cut it with, and the best types of wood to use for making miniature furniture. So I thought I'd just share with you a few tips which I hope will be of help. I want to start by talking about different types of wood. In my tutorials I always recommend 4 types of wood: basswood, limewood, gelatong and a beche, and all of these can be cut with a basic craft knife. Out of the 4, gelatong, got a small sample piece here, is the best quality. It's got a closer or tighter grain, and working down to a beche, which has a wider grain and doesn't have that natural luster that the gelatong has. Although I find that when making 12th scale pieces or larger, a beche works really well. It sands well to a lovely smooth finish, and also takes paint and varnish well. So overall, a beche or a less expensive wood can finish just as well as a more expensive, better quality wood. Each of the woods I've mentioned are available in sheet, dowel or strip form, and the sheet wood comes in 0.87mm or 1/32 of an inch, and that we would use as a veneer or for mouldings. 1.5, which I use a lot, or 1/16 of an inch, a 2.5, 3/32 of an inch, and a 3mm, 1/8 of an inch. They come in thicker pieces, but you wouldn't be able to cut through anything thicker than a 3mm, 1/8 of an inch with a craft knife. Then you'd have to move on to sort of heavy duty tools, band saws and things like that. So I like to stick to up to 3mm, and we'll come to that when I get to the actual cutting section. There are of course other types of wood you could use, but you want something that you can cut with a craft knife rather than the power tools. It's always a good idea to know what can be cut with a craft knife, to check what we call the Janka rating of a piece of wood. And a Janka test is a test that determines the hardness or density of a piece of wood, and how they do it is by inserting a small steel ball into the wood at force, which measures the pounds force. So for example, balsa wood, got a piece here, has a Janka rating of 90, and the other woods I suggest are around 430 or lower. Something like yew, the wood of a yew tree, would be 1520. So you wouldn't be able to cut that with a craft knife, but it just shows you the differences in the density of the wood. There's a really good website actually that you can look at, wooddatabase.com. I'll put a link in below, and that lists every type of wood and all the information that you'd possibly need to know about it, along with the Janka rating. So if you want to use anything other than I've suggested, just check the Janka rating and go for something between, I don't know, 350 and 500. And anything up to 500 you would be able to cut with just a basic craft knife. I've got a piece of mahogany here, which is a lovely, lovely wood, but the rating is around sort of 900 to 1000 depending on where the tree is from, and that would just be too hard to cut with a craft knife. And you can see it's got that lovely close grain, and it's a really lovely good quality wood, but you wouldn't be able to cut it with a craft knife. So if that's what you're looking for, you'd need to go for something with a lower Janka rating. And also on the website you'll find information about allergies and the toxicity of different types of wood, which is really useful to know. And it is just things like certain woods such as a beche can cause runny noses, itchy eyes if you get the dust near your eyes, so it's always advisable to wear glasses when you're sanding, protective glasses, and a dust mask as well, or make sure you've got a really well ventilated room. This is the craft knife that I like to use, and it's called a Swan Morton, and it takes a size 10A surgical blade, which just clips into place over the end. I'll just show you. I use pliers to remove it. So you've just got this metal end, and then the blade just clips over, like so, and then you just clip it into place, holding the knife open, like that. And this will cut through woods of up to 3mm in thickness, and woods of the density that I spoke about in the first part. I recommend you always put a new blade in at the start of a project, so always have plenty of spare blades. And if you're doing quite a large project with lots of pieces and you find that the knife begins to catch or drag along the wood as you're working, that means that it's becoming blunt, so then change it. These are available from most craft shops, or just search Google for Swan Morton craft knife, and that should find a local supplier for you. I find it's often the case that pieces of wood direct from the manufacturer aren't always square. So the first thing to do before you even start cutting your pieces is to make sure that it's square, and if not, to square it off. And to do that, we use the lines on the cutting mat. So line up one side, so at the top of that side is at the edge of the horizontal line there, and then just lay your ruler across so it's in line with that top line there, and then you can just trim off anything that's overhanging, and that will just square the piece off. And even if it's just a tiny amount, it's worth doing, because even sort of a fraction of an inch or a half a millimetre when you're working at scale can make a big difference to the piece. So general sort of tips for cutting wood: always make sure you've got a nice sharp pencil. The sharper the better, make a more accurate pencil mark. And then take your ruler and make the measurement, and there's no need to draw a line across, so just a tiny mark at each edge of the wood, like so is enough, and then lay your ruler across so it's just below that pencil line, and that will then allow for the thickness of your knife blade. And then begin by making just a gentle light score, and that will help keep the blade on track. So a nice light score, and then I also cut into that end of the wood, and then you'll find that as you're going along it doesn't split at that end, and then you can just go across a few more times. And this wood is 1.5mm in thickness, that's 1/16 of an inch, so the thicker the wood becomes, the more times you'll need to score across. And with 3mm you think you're not going to get through, but just keep going and you will. And then when you've cut the wood to measurement, just sand off the edge you've just cut by going across the sandpaper in just one direction. Don't rock it back and forth or you'll round off the edges. And there's the piece. And then I always stick to the rule that the longest edge should be in direction of the grain. In my cutting lists I sometimes state otherwise, and that's because this edge that's in line with the grain is always neater. Against the grain, and I'm not sure you can see that on camera, but you can see the inside of the grain, and it doesn't sand as well, and it's quite bobbly. So if I'm doing something like a draw divide, which is going to be deeper than it is higher, I'll cut the shortest edge in the direction of the grain, and then you just get a neater finish at the front of your piece of furniture, and then you're ready to make your second cut. So again, you're just making a pencil mark at either end of the wood, and because now we're going in the direction of the grain, it's going to be a lot easier. So again, make the light cut, and there, just a couple of cuts there and we're through. Now something not to do is to measure. If you need several pieces of the same size, always use the ruler to measure. Don't use the piece you've just done like this and either cut alongside it or draw your lines alongside it. Always go back to your ruler, because if this piece is out just slightly, the next piece will be, and the next piece and the next piece, so then you've wasted quite a lot of wood. So always go back to using the ruler. Another tip is, again, if you're cutting several pieces of the same size, don't measure them all out along the piece of wood. So if you need, say, several pieces that are 20mm, don't go along like that and then cut. Cut the first piece and then measure again, because again the thickness of the blade will affect these measurements. So once you've cut that piece off, this is no longer 20mm, it's going to be slightly shorter, and again there and again, so each piece will be slightly out. So always cut and then measure again. If you're cutting from a piece of wood that is narrower than the thickness of your ruler, the ruler will sort of tend to rock back and forth, so just slot another piece of wood alongside the piece you're cutting like that, and then that will just balance the ruler, and then you can just cut without it rocking back and forth. And something else I do is keep all the offcuts of wood just in an old lunch box or something, or an old biscuit tin. I have a tin for each thickness of wood, and these smaller pieces can just come in handy when you're doing drawers or smaller projects or mouldings. Try not to throw anything away. If, for example, you're doing a piece like this, which will be used as a shelf on a table, and you need to cut out sections for the legs, always cut against the grain first. So if, for example, I'm cutting this out and I go in the direction of the grain first, oops, you can see there, as I just removed the knife, that's split. So if you cut against the grain first, like so, and then in the direction of the grain to remove the piece, you will avoid that splitting. So finally, I just want to talk about cutting stripwood and dowel. And I've got a couple of pieces here, 3mm and 5mm. That's 1/8 of an inch and just under 1/4 of an inch. And I just want to demonstrate that also, although you can cut through the 3mm with a craft knife, I would advise not to, and I'll show you why. So firstly, it does take quite a bit of pressure to get through, like so. And I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but it hasn't cut in a straight line. It's left the end at an angle. So that's why I advise not to do it, even though you can sort of hack through it with a knife. It is best to use the mitre block and saw. So I'm going to demonstrate here with the 5mm piece of stripped wood. So begin by measuring up your piece, and you just need to make a pencil mark on one edge, like that, and then place it in your mitre block, and I'm just obviously just cutting a straight line here. The highest edge of the mitre block should be towards you. So place it in so that the pencil line is just to the left of the central groove there. And again, that's just to cater for the thickness of the saw blade. So you're basically sawing just above that line, or just next to it, depending on which direction you're in. So just hold it firmly into place as you saw. And there we are. Phone just went flying. And there you've got a nice, neat, straight cut. And that's the same as well with dowel. Always use your mitre block. And then if you find that the saw blade is catching at the edge of the block, just use a bit of candle wax and just wipe it there along the blade. And this is just an old tea light candle that I've burnt out. Just wipe it along the blade on both sides, and you'll then just find that that just passes through easier. And another way to cut strip wood is by using one of these handheld cutters, and this cuts at the angles as well, so you can do mitre joins for things like picture frames, etc. And again, this does cut up to 5mm and probably more, but I haven't tried anything thicker than 5mm. So you would just to do a straight cut, you would measure up the piece and place it so that, again, the pencil line is just to the side of the line there. You can see in the middle of the mitre tool, and you make sure it's straight against these pieces here. There's one of those either side, so if you line it up straight against that, and then just cut through. And it does take a little bit of pressure, but quite easy to use, as you can see there. And then take them out, and always make sure you close this down and lock it. And if, like that, it's probably because the blade's going a little bit blunt, you've got a bit of a sort of frayed edge there. You can just trim that off with your craft knife, like that, rather than sanding, as again you might round the end. So again, these are available from most craft suppliers, or just search Google or eBay for a handheld mitre cutter. Really nice, handy little tool to have. I hope you found some of those tips useful and that they'll help you with your miniature builds. If there's anything else you'd like to know, do get in touch. I'll put my email address below, or you can contact me through Facebook. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far, and if you haven't already done so, please do, as I've got lots of tutorials planned for you. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you soon. Bye.